Lucy.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Malu.
And this is Learning and Chill. On today's episode of Learning and Chill, we will be talking about the Peruvian Revolution.
Woohoo! Get ready, kids. This is going to be so educational.
Nowadays, we see Peru as the home of the beautiful Machu Picchu and associated to the Incas.
However, long before it became known as the home of the llamas and alpacas, Peru was known for the oppressed viceroyalty being the last royal bastion.
To kick it all off, we're going to give you a short overview of the situation in Peru before the revolutionary and independent spirits took over the region.
But first, let's go back in history to discover how they were each formed, specifically Peru.
Spain had 4 different viceroyalties during its colonization period:
Rio de la Plata, Nueva Granada, New Spain, and Peru!
First of all, let us not get confused. We are talking about Peru before 1824.
Please keep in mind that at that time, modern times Bolivia, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, and Peru were all part of Peru.
Much before independence movements emerged in Spanish America, pre-1700s, there were only 2 viceroyalties in the Spanish Empire in the Americas:
the Viceroyalty of Peru and the Viceroyalty of New Spain.
The Viceroyalty of Peru was established in 1542 and originally contained most of Spanish-ruled South America, with the exception of Brazil, having its capital in Lima.
As the South American region had an abundance of precious metals, Spanish-appointed viceroys were put in charge of the viceroyalties in order to ease the exploitations of such metals.
These royal metals were collected through the Quinto del Rey, or Royal Fifth, which was a 20% tax on all precious metals and natural resources collected inside the colonies.
In Peru, the most exploited resource was silver, extracted specifically from the silver mines in Potosí, which is today part of Bolivia.
Because of its close ties with the monarchy for its medalist background, Peru was perhaps the most loyal out of all of the 4 Spanish viceroyalties in Spanish America.
As Spain ruled over Portugal over a period of time, they disregarded the Treaty of Tordesillas and did not resist their urge to expand, consequently establishing the viceroyalties of Nueva Granada and Rio de la Plata for the previous Peruvian territory, shifting the capital of trade to Buenos Aires and Caracas and decreasing the industries of metals and textiles in Peru.
This economic shift in the Spanish colonies began a rivalry between the viceroyalties of Rio de la Plata and Peru, as both were not only economic centers, but also medalist ones.
The competition between the 2 most economically prominent Spanish viceroyalties in South America became even greater with the annexation of Upper Peru to Rio de la Plata in 1776.
The separation of Peru with the establishment of 2 new viceroyalties was a turning point that led to the independent ideals that eventually separated the viceroyalties into the countries that they are today, such as Chile, Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay, along with the rest of the South American nations.
The revolutionary spirit in Latin America differed from that of the United States greatly. Unfortunately, the colonies lacked unity amongst each other, and the social hierarchy imposed also led to many problems.
In Peru, the Indians made up 58% of the population, the mestizos 20%, and the whites 12%.
All of these social classes were not united, as they all had different interests and were each affected distinctly by the colonial rule.
Following the Bourbon reforms, which began in Spanish America after the Bourbon family in Spain succeeded the long-lasting Habsburg dynasty, the Creoles lost significant amount of power, for they were replaced in the assemblies for Spanish-appointed officials, corregidores,
which translates directly to correctors. So in other words,
the Spanish were trying to correct the colonies.
Additionally, these reforms caused the natives to open their eyes and finally want a change regarding their oppression and harsh treatment.
One of the most popular of such rebellions was the Tupac Amaru Second Rebellion in 1780, which developed in Cusco and gained strong influence in the area.
Yet, rebellions like those were quickly shut down by the government.
Shortly after it began to gain strength, Peru's Spanish government ordered the brutal killing of Tupac Amaru by tying each of his limbs to a different horse, which ran in a different direction.
Wait, poor Tupac. That's a horrible way to die.
Wait, hold on. Isn't Tupac alive?
No, Gabby. Tupac's dead. And it's another Tupac we're talking about.
Are you sure? Although these rebellions were mostly opposing fiscal measures and bad treatment, as opposed to the independence movements, they did show the growing dissatisfaction in the population.
At the time, the Spanish crown had put into office Viceroy José Fernando de Abascal y Sousa in 1806, who was responsible for leading the Viceroyalty's economic, political, and social affairs from up close.
Abascal stamped out local rebellions by organizing the army within Peru. The Royal Army of Peru defeated patriot movements in both Argentina and Chile, which fought on their own, but were previously part of the Rio de la Plata Viceroyalty.
Besides that, like it had been previously done by the Bourbon reforms, Abascal de Sousa promoted educational reforms,
reorganizing the army and forming militias within the Spanish Viceroyalty.
As we previously mentioned, Peru was the center of loyalist and royalist ideals and affairs, for it remained the Viceroyalty that was the closest to the Spanish mainland.
That was much due to the leadership of Abascal.
As Viceroy, Abascal also reincorporated large parts of South America into the Peruvian Viceroyalty, such as Upper Peru, which for its loyalist movements was detached from the anti-royalist Rio de la Plata, Argentina, and Chile.
The royalist movement in Upper Peru was so large that in 1810, they fought pro-independence Argentines.
As the pro-independence movements grew in Spanish America, Peru maintained its loyalty to the Spanish crown.
Despite the break of ties between the now independent nations of Argentina, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Chile from Spain, Peru continued to serve as an economic supply for the nation.
Although there was social discontent, it was not enough to rebel against the Spanish government.
And when there were rebellions, change was hardly ever achieved.
This made Peru the last viceroyalty to remain loyal to the Spanish crown.
Thus, Peru is known for being the only Spanish-American colony which had an independence movement led by foreign parties.
By that time, the former viceroyalties of Rio de la Plata and New Granada had already claimed their independences.
Their anti-royalist and anti-Spanish spirits inspired them to believe that they were responsible to free the rest of the Spanish colonies in the New World.
On September 20th, 1820, an army mostly Argentine and Chilean, led by José de San Martín, occupied Peru, founding the Expedición Libertadora de Perú.
The army, which included over 4,200 men, had warships and was financed by Chile.
San Martín secured many ships with the help of the United States and Britain, and with the help of officer Lord Cochrane, they organized the army. Thus, the pro-independence forces did not lack the necessary force to defeat the Royal Army of Peru and its ties to the Spanish monarchy.
After significant preparation, organization, and finance, South American citizens from liberated countries, primarily Argentines, began their expedition to liberate their fellow neighbor.
José de San Martín soon led the commission in Peru.
The expedition sailed for Peru on August 20th and arrived in the Paracas Bay in Pisco, 100 miles south of Lima, where they met the resisting loyalist population, delaying their move towards the capital.
He hopes that through propaganda, blockade, and negotiation with the Spanish representatives and with the Peruvian loyalists that he would soon be able to gain control of the area.
The elite Creoles and Peninsulares felt worried and threatened by a possible mestizo and Indian revolt, and thus did not take action to impede San Martín, first siding with him, despite not agreeing with his political aims of independence for Peru.
Due to public resistance, the expedition was not successful at first. However, in June 1820, the Spanish army fled and retreated in the Andes.
On July 21st, 1821, almost a year after battles and negotiations, San Martín's army occupied Lima, the capital of the last Spanish viceroyalty.
Once they got a hold of Lima, San Martín and his followers proclaimed the independence of Peru, marking the downfall of Spanish colonization in Spanish America.
However, this was not enough to make the viceroyalty free from its royal ties.
Spain did not recognize Peruvian independence and continued to make territorial claims of the newly established country.
Additionally, San Martín had to face the Peruvian aristocracy, which were against his social reforms in the area.
San Martín seeks to end the indigenous tributes and grant freedom to slaves, changes that built the opposition of the Peruvian elite.
In August 1821, the Spanish army returned to Lima in order to challenge San Martín's army. San Martín became convinced that a monarchy would be the only way to stop Spanish rule. Thus, he sent a secret mission to Europe seeking for the Prince of Peru.
Meantime, Simón Bolívar, an influential character of the other Latin American revolutions, began to gain strength in Peru as well.
His successes in Rio de la Plata and Nueva Granada inspired San Martín and other pro-independent figures.
While San Martín believes in monarchy, Simón Bolívar seeks for a government that would be republican in form and oligarchical in content. However, despite these different beliefs for the future, they both knew that they needed to focus on freeing Peru from Spanish forces.
San Martín resigned from his position in 1823 once he returned to Peru and realized that his enemies had rallied against him and removed his chief minister from power.
This left Bolívar to decide the Peruvian rebellion, and after letting the situation deteriorate, he finally sent one of his closest friends, Antonio José de Sucre, to lead the battle alongside the pro-independence South Americans against the Peruvian loyalist forces, the Royal Army of Peru, and the Spanish crown.
This battle, known as the Battle of Ayacucho, was fought in Peruvian soil and officially ended in 1826. The pro-independence forces defeated the joint Spanish and Peruvian loyalist armies and immediately installed an independent government in Upper Peru and named the country after Bolivia.
However, the question of whether this war truly led to much change still persisted.
Even after the battle, Spain continued to make unsuccessful attempts to regain control of the territory. The Battle of Callao in 1866, for example, was extremely unprosperous as the Spanish bombarded the Peruvian ports of Callao on May 2nd, but on the next day left after no apparent damage to the port and no significant retaliation of the Peruvian forces.
The Spanish, however, still resisted its lack of power and tried to gain influence in South America, a massive territory it once dominated, through multiple unsuccessful and small-scale battles, and Peruvian independence was only recognized by Spain in 1879.
Besides the Spanish unwillingness to recognize Peru's independence, the independence also did not cause much change in the colonies, for the colonies just became self-led with colonial structures.
The lower classes, made up of mestizos, Indians, and slaves, were largely oppressed in a hegemonic relationship with the Creoles and Peninsulares, leaving the social hierarchy completely unaltered with the independence.
Additionally, women's treatment also did not change with the independence, even though many women had fought and died during these revolutionary movements and battles.
The social situation remained stagnated, and the colonial resemblance continued. Moreover, economically, Peru lacked proper infrastructure for economic prosperity, and the situation even declined, as they did not realize their trade potential.
And since they had suffered great loss and damage to their mines during the wars, they needed to charge high taxes in order to properly reinvest in the reparation of these mines. The period after independence was rocky and completely post-colonial, suffering economic, political, and social burden from the wars that had been fought. It was only after independence that the true battle for dignity and justice began.
Since the times as viceroyalty, Peru has lost a significant amount of land, and several different countries have been formed from the Peruvian territory.
Now, instead of Peru being a source of silver, Peru is known for attracting millions of tourists to its natural landmarks, such as its mountains and beaches.
So, students, thank you for watching this episode of Learning and Chill.
That was tiring.
It was a lot to cover.
Well, thanks for watching.
I'm Malu.
And I'm Gabby.
And this was Learning and Chill.
On today's episode of Learning and Chill, we will be talking about the Russian...
Shortly after it began,
which had an Just before independence movements emerged, began their expedition to liberate the fellow YouTube
they do not realize.
You know what's mine.
So they know. The Peruvian, the Spanish, or economically, the social situation.